Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the Imperial Holonet. I am JD123, and today I'm joined by Jake Carlton, Nathan Snyder, and Red Leader to talk about Flash. Season 1. Oh, my voice cracked. That was not good. And now, folks, I give the floor to Jake because this was his idea. So, Jake, you have the floor.
All right, awesome. So this is something that I suggested to everybody to sort of go through this season of The Flash and sort of talk about it and analyze it. Because I haven't watched the first couple seasons of Arrow, but I've watched a decent amount of the other CW stuff, and I think this is by far the strongest season that CW has produced of superhero shows. And as you guys probably know already, Flash is one of my favorite, if not my favorite character. And so I just wanted to talk about this because this is really, really strong.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess maybe just go round robin about you all thought about the first season overall and kind of your
Yeah,
experience
sure.
with it. Jake, we'll start with you. You go first.
All right. So the first season of The Flash is a really strong and just in general is really strong and really ambitious. Even though the show definitely has some hiccups, the hiccups are usually limited to just stuff we're doing with the supporting cast, whether it's some poorly characterized villains of the weeks like the Freak of the Week metahumans, or it's something like in episode 12, Crazy for You, Caitlin has this whole arc about trying to go out and actually live her life and get over this tragedy and get over Ronnie and start seeing other people. And then immediately the next episode, we bring Ronnie Raymond back and she rekindles her romance with him. Even when we have stuff like that, um, the main sort of core cast of characters, mainly Joe, Barry, Wells, Captain Cold when he's there, sometimes Iris. Those characters are written so well and so consistently, and everybody in the show turns in just such a great performance that those things can kind of carry us through some of the weaker moments. And especially true because this show has such reverence and respect for the source material that let's say we're in that situation where we watch Crazy for You and then the next episode I'm left wondering why did we spend 45 minutes doing a character study of why Caitlin needs to move on when she's just going to go back to Ronnie. The reverence and the respect they have for the source material makes the show so fun and enjoyable, that this show is never not watchable. It's always fun, it's always enjoyable, and there's just some really strong stuff that goes on here.
Awesome. Red, how about you go next? Especially because you're having weather issues, so we might lose you at any moment.
The storm's passed. Uh, it's been a while since I watched most of Flash season 1, but I think it still probably holds up as the best first season of any of the CW shows. And I think might be one of the only cases in recent memory of actually pulling off the season-long villain thing, which I think has kind of been the biggest weakness of The Flash and Arrow moving forward. it I don't know, it does a great job of building on what Arrow did. It's a really effective spin-off, and I wasn't really much of a Flash guy going into this, but the stuff that I did know definitely got me excited when they played on all the comic book references, and it really feels like the most comic book show of the entire CWU.
All right. Red, if you didn't have anything else to say. Nathan, how about you? Season 1 overall thoughts?
Um, well, the season one of The Flash. Okay, before going this, I did watch. I was a follower for Arrow going forward because I watched the first two seasons. I saw the episodes with Barry Allen. I was like, oh, I like him. He's a cool kid. But I was a little familiar with the Flash because I read some Silver Age comics. So when they announced the TV show, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I started watching the show, and I just became really enraptured, and not sure if that's the right word. I mean, more like entranced. I don't know. Like, I loved it. Like, this is probably out of all the seasons they've done with the CW verse, this is probably my favorite. It was just really fun. I love the characters. I just felt so much excitement for it. The action was really entertaining. I thought they really nailed the character of Barry Allen well. I dig the I really like the cast. Captain Cold is awesome, by the way. And yeah, I can agree. It's like the most comic book show. It just embraces its source material very well.
All right. And I'm on mute, by the way, now. Sorry. I'll just give my brief thoughts. So I watched some Arrow. I watched some Flash. I think I do like Flash overall more because, like Red said, it's the most comic booky of the show, and it's like watching a live action cartoon, and I love cartoons. Like the Mark Hamill stuff. He's pretty much just a live action cartoon. Gotta love my Mark Hamill. I like the more lighthearted nature of the show. I like definitely just the more, again, comic book aspects of it. I like the acting. I mean, I'm not the biggest Flash person, so I probably won't have too much to say. Again, my introduction to Flash was Justice League through Wally West, and that's actually, I guess that's a good place to start. Actually, if you want to transition to characters, we can talk to you about Barry Allen and how he's kind of more of a Wally West than he is a Barry Allen. And Jake, I'm sure you have a lot to say on that matter, so I'll leave that to you if you want to start us off there.
Sure. Well, I do kind of want to defend how they characterize Barry here, because usually when they make Barry into Wally, it's kind of a problem. But I think because the main writers, at least in the first couple episodes of the show, were Andrew Kreisberg, Jeff Johns, and I think Greg Berlanti may have even had some credits here. Yeah, Greg Berlanti was working on the story as well. So having, obviously Kreisberg is no longer with the CW for better or for worse, probably better for the cast. But Kreisberg and Berlanti definitely have great reverence for this character, and I think knew what they were doing. But pulling Jeff Johns in, at least for the first couple episodes and a couple key episodes moving forward, was definitely a really, really good move, because I can see his name over all of this. Jeff Johns has gone on record multiple times stating that Barry Allen is his favorite comic book character, and his voice for Barry, that I know from the comics, is really clear here, although I think with the help of Kreisberg and Berlanti and the fact that this is the beginning of Barry Allen's era as the Flash, his voice is a little bit clearer and more consistent than it was in the comics. And so, yeah, he is kind of more fun-loving and makes some jokes, and that may be more Wally West. But really, all of that stuff with Wally comes from a place of him being over-emotional with all of his emotions, and him always wanting to be like the center of attention and kind of the class clown. But with Barry, and they have lines about this, I think, in the second or third episode, Barry's whole thing is when his mother died, he was so consumed by that he really wasn't able to live. But this guy is now able to have a social life because of his superpowers, because he's a superhero now, which not only is flipping that trope on his head of, oh, my life is so complicated now that I'm a hero, I can't do anything, and it's funny that we kind of that this show was coming out, and that was sort of the message when Arrow was doing the exact opposite, where Ollie was saying, I can't be Oliver Queen anymore, I can only be the Arrow. So there was a lot of stuff going on in Flash and Arrow just when the show started. That was really fascinating, where characters were sort of inverses of each other, but their voices were accurate to the comics. And that idea of Barry Allen being sort of emotionally slow was a Jeff Johns thing. and him being able to have a life because of his powers and be more like himself because of his powers, I think is definitely a Barry Allen thing. Although, down the line, if they ever do something substantive with Wally, I think that could be part of his character too. It kind of is in the comics, but I think overall, this character is definitively Barry. And even though there are some hiccups with him during the season, this is probably one of the best Barry Allens that has ever been written.
Oh wow. I know Jeff Johns is. I don't know who the other two are, especially the one who just left CW. Are they also comic writers or just TV dudes?
Yeah, Kreisberg's written comics a little bit. He even wrote Green Arrow during its New 52 run. They were both heads on a bunch of the CW verse shows as well.
Well, so Berlanti is sort of the, you know what? I'm not sure exactly what his title is. I'll see if I can find that. But he's basically a writer and producer of all of this stuff and sort of oversees everything of the CW verse. And Kreisberg was the executive producer of Flash and Arrow. But when Supergirl started, Kreisberg was more so on Supergirl, even though he was still kind of overseeing Flash in seasons 3 and 4. But for the most part, he was the executive producer. He does have some writing credits during the first season. But Berlanti is usually the guy who sort of just oversees everything broadly. So yeah, but I mean, this is the same team from Arrow, pretty much, which is kind of surprising because, like you guys said, and like I said too, this is like the best of the best with the CW verse. So I think it was really fitting that they started with Arrow, sort of had that two-parter backdoor pilot in Arrow season 2 for the Flash. It got picked up, not for a full season, but for 11 or 12 episodes, and we could talk about like where they were trying to cap it off. And then they ended up trying to do sort of like a backdoor pilot for Firestorm in the second half of the season. And then the character ended up going to Legends of Tomorrow.
Wow. That's one way to set up your universe. Just backdoor piloting everybody. Alright. So, anyone else want to speak on Barry?
Yeah, I think they pretty much nailed Barry's characterization well. I mean, speaking of John's writing, I'll admit this. Like the second episode, the opening monologue, I was just thinking to myself, this sounds like something Jeff Johns would write. Then I saw the credits, it's like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's him. But yeah, I think they really work well with the aspect of wanting to get Barry, trying to see Barry, like you said, Jake, be more social after he got his powers, but also to try to be more accepting and move on and wanting to do better in life, I guess.
Well, and another thing that just has Jeff Johns' name all over it is the whole death of his mother thing. Because as you guys know, Barry's mother was not killed as a child in continuity until the 2009 Flash Rebirth, which of course was written by Jeff Johns, and that was the big, we're bringing Barry Allen back from the dead. This is what we're doing with him. This is how we're tying Reverse Flash more into his origin. And they did sort of change that and sort of tweak that a little bit because, I mean, Barry didn't find out until his adult life that Thawne killed his mother, which is what happens here. But it was never the case in the comics that Barry, as an adult future Flash, was there fighting Thawne when he killed his mother, which is a really interesting take that the show chose to go with. So we're sort of predestining Barry being able to fight this, sociopathic stalker from the 25th century. And unless you guys have anything else to say about Barry for right now, just sort of generally about his character, I think this is probably a good way to segue into Eobard Thawne because, man, this is definitively the best version of Eobard Thawne ever written, period.
Yes, I agree with you.
They humanized him so much, and the key to that is doing this sort of reverse legacy destiny thing where Thawne has a line in episode 20 in his flashback during the trap. He came here to destroy him, and in order to get home, he has to be the one who creates him, speaking about the Flash, which is just an absolutely fascinating position to put that character in, because pre-Jeff Johns, Barry Allen Flash, pre-Rebirth Flash, or Flash Rebirth, Thawne was always kind of this... I mean, he really was like a sociopathic stalker. Like, if you read his Silver Age stuff from the comics, he is straight up like a crook from the future who uses the Flash's gimmick to steal things that he wants. And then when he travels back in time, a lot of his stuff is vying for the Flash's love interest. Like, he's trying to make Iris West fall in love with him instead of Barry Allen. So he is sort of like this creep, in a way, who is sort of like immature and kind of jealous of the Flash. And I do want to come back to Eddie on that for a second, because there's some interesting stuff that they were going to do with him. But, giving him this sort of responsibility where he has to create the Flash in order to get home, is just so fascinating. And everything we do with that character, and I mean literally everything, is pitch perfect. Every line he has is like a double or triple entendre once you know what's going on. He is instantly quotable every episode because of that. Like, one of the great things he says in the pilot is, after Barry gets his powers and he flashes back and we find out there was a man in yellow that night when his mom died, he tells the team what happened and says, what if the man in yellow was like me? And Wells says, I can say unequivocally, you are one of a kind, which is, totally, it's this weird situation, but fascinating situation where it's the truth, but also not the truth, because Barry is speaking to his greatest enemy, the Reverse Flash, the man who killed his mother. But the Reverse Flash, as he admits, comes to look upon Barry with pride and love, and like an equal amount of pride and love, in contrast to his hate, which he also holds to the Flash during the season. And it's just so fascinating and so good. And every time that character is on screen, he just totally steals the show. And a lot of that goes to Tom Cavanaugh and how fantastic of an actor he is.
Oh yeah, like that dude, like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Every time he's on screen, I just feel that he has this charismatic presence to him that I just love. It just gets my attention every time.
Right, and like, because we don't really know who he is during the season, and that's kind of the mystery of, like, is he Reverse Flash? He has powers, but what kind of a Reverse Flash is he? Like, is he really Harrison Wells? Because that name is so, like, for Flash fans from the comics, I could totally see Thawne, like, making up the name of Harrison Wells in order to be responsible for creating his hero.
And it's such an obvious name.
I know. And part of me kind of wishes that they did go full throttle and say, no, like, Tom Cavanaugh is Eobard Thawne, and he just came up with this name and is kind of surprised that Barry didn't figure out that he's a time traveler because he picked the name of a time traveler.
Oh, I gotta ask, because you guys would know, because I wouldn't. Did they try to do the In Darkness thing where it's like, he's not Khan, he's Khan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except that was done better here than Into Darkness.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and so just speaking on that really quickly, the producers, and I think it was Kreisberg, said that, Tom Cavanaugh basically came on to do the full season as like a favor for them because he'd worked with them before. And so the little wrinkle that they included to allow Tom to come back because they loved him so much was to include the fact that Harrison Wells was another person that Thawne assumed the identity of and sort of the DNA of in order to sort of enact his plan to make the particle accelerator go off faster. And so that originally wasn't their plan. They were just going to have Tom be the Reverse Flash. And even though I like Matt Letcher, like, everything they'd done with this character was so good, and because they did this reverse legacy thing where Thawne at the end of his life has to create the Flash. And the idea, I thought, was that as time moved forward linearly in the present, as Barry was developing himself as the Flash, he was going to keep on meeting a younger and younger and younger and younger and younger version of Thawne until he, at the end of his career as the Flash, sort of inspired Thawne to become the Reverse Flash. And it would be this big, causal loop of both characters kind of having the same arc where they hate each other initially, but then come to have hate and love and pride for one another at the end. But because it's happening at different points in the timeline, the characters are never really able to be on the same playing field, and they're always at the reverse perspective that the other one is having, which is absolutely fascinating. And I wish that they would have let Tom play that character some more, even though he did come back later. But Matt Letcher is a fine Reverse Flash, and I do like that they incorporated the whole Reverse Flash is willing to, manipulate people so much to the point that he'll put on any face he needs to get what he wants, straight out of the comics.
What I find kind of fun about him is the Letcher version is kind of that stalker version, not just because it's early in the timeline, but he acts much more creepy when he is talking to Barry. Like, he's fucking terrifying in a completely different way than Wells as well. Wells Thawne is so tactical and 20 steps ahead and cold. Well, this guy's just like a predator almost. And I mean that as like an animal, like he's almost animalistic in how he's hunting Barry, and he's just completely different, but kind of the same obsessiveness, just taking different forms because of what he needs from him.
Well, and now that I'm sort of saying it, I guess it does make sense to have Reverse Flash wear different faces depending on where he is as a character. Like, every time he goes through an arc, he puts on another face the next time he goes through an arc. That's kind of fascinating. But Thawne, Tom is just so good as Thawne. Everything they did with him is fascinating. And again, like every single episode, he has just quotes on quotes on quotes. Like, the humanizing thing about him is that they sort of deal with the Speed Force in this really comic book way, where and time travel, where he is a paradox, but because he's screwed with the timeline, he doesn't have full control over his powers. So now he's put in this impossible situation where he has to be responsible for creating the Flash and being the impetus for why these people get together and why this team forms. And that is kind of in character for him, and seems like a choice he would make on his own if he wasn't forced into this position by sort of fate, because Thawne has always wanted to, be a part of the Flash legacy. And I don't think there would be a crueler or I guess just an action that would show his love for the Flash other than being the reason why he exists in the first place, kind of. And there's this really interesting shot in, I think it's episode 19, because Barry and Wells are looking at screens of Hannibal Bates's cells and how they sort of replicate and change. And the shot is from behind them. Barry's on the left, Thawne is on the right, and the mannequin that has the Flash suit is in the middle of them. And we sort of start on the ground and sort of pan in to see both of them looking at the screens. But, we're getting closer and closer to the Flash costume. And stuff like that is just signaling, sort of subconsciously that Wells is just as much as responsible for the Flash being the Flash as Barry is. And that's kind of uncomfortable, but in a really great way.
I gotta just say, when you talk about the time travel plot in this season, I could have, in lesser hands, this could have been gone very wrong. And I've seen
totally.
I've seen bad time travel plots like this. I watch Doctor Who after all.
Yeah, plus also the changing personalities with masks. All I can think is, oh, the Master.
That too. They could have gone a cheap way. Well, he does have. Well, Thawne does seem to have a very master kind of plan here. Well, when written well. But regardless, like I'm just amazed. Like this, wow, this time travel plot really works.
Well, and what's fascinating is that it's such a slow burn, and usually I hate that. But they struck such a nice balance of giving us the bare amount of information we needed every episode in order to keep us satisfied, but also raise 15 more questions and keep us coming back for more. The mystery and the intrigue about this character and about the future history, like this is the best that this has ever been handled ever with Flash in any medium. It's just so good. They struck such a nice balance with that. And like I said, usually I hate the slow burn, i.e. Iris in this show with the two revelations, with her finding out that Barry has feelings and her finding out Barry is the Flash. Because very clearly, like when she finds out that Barry has feelings for her, even though it's a great scene, it's the mid-season finale, and the stuff that we do with her in episodes 6, 7, and 8 before that just kind of feels like filler. So I can tell that they just sort of arbitrarily chose this is the episode where Barry tells her instead of him telling her coming from a character place. So, that's sort of an example of this show having such a great beat on the main cast, but sometimes the supporting cast can be sort of up and down.
You want to get into the Team Flash thing?
Oh, well, actually, you know what? I do want to really quickly mention the Eddie Thawne thing. Because, so, and what I mean is, like, we'll get into his character a little bit later, but there's a draft of the first episode, the pilot of the show, online. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to go see if there were other scripts online, because I would love to read those. But one of these, the draft of the pilot that's online sets up Eddie as this really fascinating character. Because I remember, when I first watched the show, I was like, whoa, are they just renaming Eobard Thawne as Eddie Thawne? Like, is he still from the future and Eobard, but calling himself Eddie because that's the kind of name we would use in this time? Like, is he really the Reverse Flash? What are they doing? And obviously that's not the case. We know he's the ancestor of Eobard Thawne. But in the draft that's online, the pilot, they sort of extend the scene of after Eddie catches the mugger of Iris's laptop, was it? And his first line when he shows up is, "Freeze, police, or are you ready to find out you're not faster than a bullet?" Which is fascinating. I love that they did that. But they sort of extended his scene where Barry and Iris are in CCPD, and she's like, "Oh, that's Detective Pretty Boy." In this scene, Eddie actually comes up to them and talks to them, and Iris sort of gives him this pushback because he's sort of this really arrogant and narcissistic cop and keeping score of everything like it's some game. And he's sort of talking down to her, and he's like, and then she sort of storms off, and he's like, "Let me guess," to Barry, "psychology major?" And he just sort of nods his head, and then you have the beat and the scene ends. And the read I got on that is that, oh my God, they were going to have Eddie Thawne be Silver Age Eobard, because he's totally narcissistic, full of himself, and like kind of like they did with Wells, dropping clues like every 5 seconds of him knowing the future and him knowing about these people from the future, like him slyly saying, "Let me guess, are you a psychology major?" And so I totally got the vibe that originally they were going to have like the original sort of characterization of Eobard Thawne in Eddie, and then have Eobard Thawne be the more cold, calculating, more human, sympathetic antagonist that has this love and hate for Barry, the more modern interpretation. And so when I read that script, I sort of got the vibe that they were tracking Eobard Thawne's character development through the comics, through the Thawne lineage in the show, which is incredible. And I wish they kind of would have done that, considering where we end up with Eddie at the end of the season. But that's just something I wanted to throw out there of like what they were doing, because I thought it was fascinating.
I'll bet this up front. When I first watched it on TV, I originally thought to myself, so okay, when they revealed later Eobard Thawne, I was thinking, so wait, is Eddie gonna become Reverse Flash and this is an origin or something? But no, they don't completely do that. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, and I guess this is a good segue into, I guess, the love stuff, if you guys want to talk about that, because
okay,
what they end up doing is making Eddie the co-worker who's vying for Barry's love interest, which, even though we have characters in the comics who are together, there's nothing inherently problematic with Eddie or Iris seeing somebody else and Barry seeing somebody else. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but because we sort of do this typical CW love triangle drama, it does kind of fall into this rut of the love triangle stuff where, and it's kind of a poor love triangle. I would say overall, this is like the biggest weakness of the season, the biggest hiccup that they had narratively, is that they did the love triangle, but they didn't make it work. And the way to make a love triangle work is to make me, as the audience, root for all three of the characters and make all of them reasonable, to a degree, so to the degree that we're not throwing the other two characters or other one character, if it's just two in the scene, under the bus in order to make one look better. And it's kind of unfortunate that we didn't get to that place, because 90% of the time when Eddie and Iris are on screen, they are, whether it's with each other or with other characters, it's talking about their relationship and nothing else. That is kind of a problem, not because the actors don't have chemistry, because I think they do, even though I think Grant Gustin and Candice Patton have more chemistry than Candice does with Rick Cosnett, the guy who plays Eddie. But their relationship is just so kind of one-dimensional, and at first I didn't really get a sense as to why Iris was interested in Eddie at all, other than the really shallow, he's pretty kind of thing. But then we get scenes with Eddie just sort of lightly sprinkled through the season here where he's not with Iris and not talking about Iris, and he's really interesting and he's really great. And I wish that we could make these characters, though, I really wish that I'm losing my train of thought as to what I was saying.
No, I get you.
But my point is that I wish we could make these characters actually feel like real people and not feel kind of like they are forced into this relationship arbitrarily when they're in scenes together. I wish we could have kept, consistency there, to where I feel like I'm watching the same character, whether he's with his girlfriend or whether he's with Barry.
They should all be buddies even when they're together.
Yeah, I will admit, I was about to say, I think the relationship between Barry and Iris is alright. The Eddie stuff is kind of iffy. Love triangles for me have always been the trickiest, hardest part to write in terms of writing for certain TV shows or movies, because you have to, like you said, you have to find the right balance of like these characters or what you want for their outcomes as well. The robot stuff just kind of feels obviously obligatory because, well, it's the CW, of course. They're well known for this.
Well, and part of it is that, with doing a love triangle properly, you need to make me root for all three of the characters. But part of the drama that they inject into this is the fact that the characters know that Barry and Iris are supposed to get together. So in that sense, the time travel stuff that is done great with everything else, does kind of shoot them in the foot with the love triangle, because how am I supposed to root for anybody when everybody knows that Barry and Iris get together? That sort of like deflates all the tension and all of the investment I'm supposed to have in these characters.
I will say, Arrow somehow managed to do that wonderfully with its first season.
Yeah.
Because we all know, I mean, obviously this didn't end up happening, but you all inherently think Green Arrow, Black Canary, but somehow, I don't know how, I think it was just an accident, but Arrow Season 1 managed to make its love triangle actually interesting because Ollie's kind of the asshole in it. And it's also an actual proper one because it's not a love arrow, it's an actual triangle. Well, that's not the case because Barry and Eddie only interact a few times, and when they do, it's great, but it's very rare. Wow,
yeah, and
you have that scene in Arrow when it's the most cliche love triangle moment when Tommy sees them through the window,
yeah,
and then you pan around and the actor acts the hell out of it, and it's like he's not angry, he's just disappointed, and it's like, that was effective. How did they do that? I don't know.
Well, and then we have the moment in the pilot where Barry sees them kissing, and it's like, oh, of course. He wakes up and he goes to tell her, and she's already with somebody else, you know? And I really like Eddie when he's not with Iris. And
he deserves so much better.
Yeah, and I like Iris sometimes when she's not with Eddie. It's just, I don't know what happened, but I just wish that Iris and Eddie were given the same treatment that Iris was during that flashback in episode 20, The Trap. I had mentioned that in one of our group chats before we started recording. That scene where Iris flashes back to where she goes to visit Barry when he's in a coma is absolutely incredible, and Candace Patton acts the fuck out of that scene, and she deserves so much more recognition for being so good. But the way they write her, that's how that relationship works. Like, she fully admits to doing dumb stuff when Barry isn't around, and that's why she needs him, and he brought all this light into the home, and then she never says anything like that in any other scene she's in. It's like there were two different people writing her, and one person, the good person, wrote that one scene. I just don't know where that Iris went, you know?
You know what they should have done? Should have gone the Star Wars route and made two of the love triangle blood related. But
well, I mean, two of them are foster siblings, so
it's already kind of creepy. Well, it's already kind of weird.
Well, and that's something interesting to talk about too, and we can come back to the love stuff later, because I do think there are some moments where it is really, really good. But it was really interesting that they made Barry get adopted by Joe and Iris, because it does kind of complicate things where legally they're siblings. And I don't think it's anywhere near as cringy or problematic as it is in later seasons where they draw attention to it, because Iris has that one line in the pilot here, and then it's never really addressed again, which I think was the smart way to go about it, because even though we sort of complicate things by making them legally siblings, we get Joe out of it. And Joe is like one of the best characters too. So like, I'm between a rock and a hard place. It's like, should they have done this or not? Like I can't give up Joe just to have him go live with somebody else, because Joe is so good too.
You know what I like about Joe and the whole him relationship with Flash is that they kind of pull the Band-Aid really quick on the whole, ooh, you have superpowers thing. Like, it's not like he got I gotta hide it from a parent figure. Like, nope, my parent figure knows I got superpowers, so he's gonna help me. That's nice.
That's one of the things I liked about. That's one of the things I loved about season one. I was just rolling my eyes, waiting for, okay, we're gonna do the cliche. He's not gonna reveal his powers to him. No, pilot. He takes the mask. He just takes the mask off after he saves him from almost dying, and I'm like, oh, okay.
In that blazing moment, he was Jaime Reyes for 5 seconds. Because Jaime is the only person who's responsible with his secret identity and just tells everyone, and it's the nicest thing.
Yeah, love it.
Well, and you're right, Nathan. I was really impressed by how quickly they got through some of those tropes with Joe in the first couple episodes. And we can talk more about the sort of Freak of the Week metahumans later, because I do think the show kind of suffers from that in the first few episodes. But the drama with Joe and stuff just really carries the first couple episodes through. Like the second episode, we have the father figure who knows his son is a hero and doesn't want him to be in danger, so he's telling him not to do it. But already by the end of the episode, the end of the second episode, we've already resolved that. I was really impressed with them for moving that fast, and that's why I was kind of disappointed that they sort of arbitrarily waited for some stuff with Iris to happen on later, because they moved so quickly with Joe and with Wells and with Caitlin and Cisco. But I really love Joe here because, and this is on Jesse Martin as well, because he is also able to act the shit out of everything he's given. Because that's that scene in the pilot where he challenges Barry and says, you know, you want to have this conversation now? Here, fine. There was no lightning in your house that night. Your dad killed your mother. It was just a scared little boy making something up. You know, he really cares about Barry, and even though he doesn't know about this, he's really genuinely, the way he's written and the way Jesse L. Martin acts it sort of comes around. And I love that, and I love the father-son stuff with him, and I love how Joe calls him his son the whole time, but it takes a couple episodes for Barry to realize he's my dad. Like, he took me to college, he showed me how to drive, he showed me how to shave. Like, he is as much of my dad, or maybe even more so, than my biological dad. And I love... Go ahead, Nathan.
The one aspect I actually love that they resolve quickly is in the second episode, he notices the board of, okay, who killed my mom, who killed Barry's mom.
Yes,
and
yeah.
He just helps that. He just decides, after finding out his powers and all this ridiculous stuff happening, he doesn't think, oh no, this is a dumb idea. He just gradually accepts this and like, all right, I will help you. He even that one of, I can't remember which episode it was, but he goes to visit Henry in jail to talk with him and figure out
the missed one, right?
Yeah, it's the third episode.
Yeah, he goes to visit. I just love that. Sorry, I've screwed up my words right now.
Interaction.
Yeah. After he reveals his identity, it's just, they really naturally work well together, and the writers just really nail how to make Joe a very good father figure to Barry himself.
Absolutely.
Then again, like in a lesser show, it's gonna be like, he's gonna be like, I don't want you using these powers. I don't want to help you. And like, nope, I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you with these powers things. Like, hooray! The father figure is helping.
Well, and that's something important to talk about too, because I'm kind of two minds about it, because the way they treat it is Barry needs to use his powers because there are other people with powers and abilities and technology out there that the police can't handle, right? Which makes sense. But we have all this talk about Barry being a hero and inspiring people and saving lives, and yet it's only made about Joe is allowing you to use your powers because he's a metahuman and the cops can't handle it. So there is kind of that, like, I don't think they're thinking about it as much as they should, especially because we don't see the Flash stop any, like, regular crime until, what is it, like, episode 18, the Little Arrow crossover, when after Eddie is found out and they're stopping all the bank robberies. Or actually, you know what? It's a couple episodes before that where Barry is, like, stopping some of the members of the Royal Flush Gang by blocking traffic. Mm-hmm. But those are the only two times.
We do have that time when he strips that criminal down in front of a cop.
Yeah, that's true as well. But that's not him, like, actively going out and stopping a crime. Yeah. This guy was trying to mug him, and he's just sort of using it in self-defense. So on that level, I was kind of like, you're talking about being a hero and justice and all this stuff, but you're only applying it to metahumans because reasons. So that's kind of inconsistent. But at the same time, what I like about Joe initially having that reaction is his first reaction to Barry having powers is, you were right, but don't tell Iris about this because I want her safe. And I resisted that so hard of just, oh, we can't tell the love interest because she has to find out later because drama. But then the next episode, Joe is trying as hard as he can to not make Barry go out there because he wants him safe as well. So it's also really consistent with what Joe is trying to do, at least initially.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Nathan, you were saying something. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
It's okay. I was gonna bring up the second episode wherein he sees the people from the burning building as trying to be a good hero to others.
Oh, you know what? That's true as well. I forgot about that.
Yeah, we do kind of get that with Wells not wanting him to get involved in crime outside of metahumans. I do wish we got something, though, more kind of like that. I forget which episode it is in Arrow that deals with the whole saving people or fighting people who aren't on the book thing.
Yeah.
And Ollie being like, oh no, we're obsessed with it, and it's like, oh, but when Laurel's in trouble, you drop everything, but Deadshot's gonna kill someone, and then that whole thing. I think we could have used maybe more of that with just fighting metahumans or dealing with something else. Because at the end of that episode, by the end of the first act, it's like, oh, there's a metahuman villain.
Well, and I don't have a problem with Thawne Wells challenging Barry, because as we know, he's from the future, and all he needs is Barry to be fast enough to break the time barrier. That's it. And so I like that Thawne in the pilot is trying to be as controlling and manipulative as possible, because at that point he really hasn't developed the love and pride for Barry that he feels at the end of the season. I like that he tries to tell him he's not a hero, he just has powers, and because that totally foreshadows and tells us what he needs. He just needs his powers. That's it. And I like that he tries to just get him to go fast and to stop him from being the man that he'll hate in the future. And I think a line that really solidifies that feeling for me, and I don't know if I should bring this up or not because it's in season 2, but it's when Harry Wells from Earth 2 tells Barry when they're trying to get him to go faster that Thawne didn't want him to reach his full potential. He just needed him to go fast enough so he could get home. But a line in this season that also works is when Barry confronts Thawne at the end of episode 22 when they have this sort of proto-Justice League fight, the team up, where Thawne says, you know, he did what he needed to do so he could get home, nothing more, nothing less. And so it is kind of a good moment for Thawne where he has to realize, like, Barry becoming the Flash is a necessary evil of him going home. And it's a necessary evil from his perspective, you know, because he doesn't want Barry to be the Flash. So I do buy that from Wells.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's just, you know, Caitlin seems to be going along with it, and it's so easily done. Like, it's like, okay, fine. Save normal people. Like, we don't really linger on that idea.
Yeah, and that's something we do, I would say, like 3 or 4 times this season, where we start an episode off where a character is in a place, and then something happens where their perspective is challenged, and by the end of the episode, the problem, i.e. the metahuman, has been taken care of, and sort of arbitrarily, without reason, the character has either stuck with their perspective or changed their perspective. And probably the worst example of that would be the Arrow crossover, but the episode before that, even Power Outage, Barry challenges Wells. And I love that scene where he challenges Wells because all it takes is him sacrificing Girder, and Barry is immediately like, wait a minute, why would you do this? Like, you don't really care about us, do you? And I love Barry in that scene, but then we take care of Girder, and or we take care of Blackout because Wells was willing to sacrifice himself for Barry. So again, Wells really isn't doing anything to show Barry that he cares about people, but Wells is just, sort of going down the line of people he has to sacrifice before he gets to Barry. And Barry just sort of accepts that he cares about people again and sort of walks off. And it's like, okay. And then because all this evidence keeps piling up, the next couple episodes in the slow burn where Barry should be questioning Wells more and more often, he seems so like dumbed down and naive because he had that moment in episode 7 where he questioned him and then immediately went back to thinking he was a super benevolent guy.
To go back to the Diggle thing from Arrow, they did that so much better with the initial Diggle challenging Oliver and then being like, okay, you made this mistake, I'll stick with you, and then Ollie does it again, and it's not because he didn't follow him, it's because people got killed. Those other Argus agents get killed.
And then he's bragging about Arrow killing people in the crossover. It's like, what?
But to the point with season 1, he actually leaves because it cost innocent people their lives, and like the whole thing with Felicity going to him and like, hey, apologize to me. He's like, no, I understand. I just need him to actually admit it. It's like, that's how you do that. You don't have to be like, okay, we bring up this idea, this theme, and then it is completed and wrapped up with a bow. Characters can decide, okay, no, this isn't a problem, or okay, it's not urgent, and then that comes back up later. But it seems like they're going so fast that they try to tie things up way too quickly.
Well, and nothing was done to change Barry's perspective. That's the problem. Like, it's not that Barry thought Wells was a good guy, challenged him because he sort of showed his hand and did something bad, and then Barry went back to thinking he was a benevolent guy. But there needed to be a lot more work done from Barry challenging him to going back to his initial position than Barry being in his initial position to challenging him. I think like the sort of meat of the story needed to be weighted the opposite end of the scale, so we could buy that Barry is still as smart and as much of a genius as he is, and is as trusting as he is when he sort of still works with Wells and thinks he's a good guy by the end of that episode.
Frankly, we needed probably to end that episode with them not working together.
Right.
Kind of like when skipping an episode in Supergirl. Like, give it a break. That's all it sometimes takes, just make it feel a little bit more organic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess since we were talking about Power Outage, let's segue into the Freak of the Week metahuman villains. Because there is stuff to talk about there. I like that they went sort of full on with a weather wizard right away. I like that we're using that throughout the whole season. In pretty much every episode, the villain that the Flash faces challenges him to use his powers in different ways. And even though it becomes more and more apparent as the season goes on that Barry is relying way too much on his team in order to give him an idea of how to defeat these people, and he should be coming up with that stuff on his own. I do like that we're doing things that will make, at least for interesting fight scenes, but something I mentioned earlier is that we do sort of have these Freak of the Weeks as poorly characterized villains, and part of me is like, well, we're doing so much work with Wells and Joe and Barry, especially in the beginning, that is there really time for that? But then you have really great standout episodes like Going Rogue, the first Captain Cold episode, The Man in Yellow, the mid-season finale with Reverse Flash, the Tricksters episode as well, the stuff they do with Grodd in episode 21, that it's like you can do like a one episode villain and have him work. But then at the same time, it's like all the villains I named, Captain Cold, Reverse Flash, and Grodd, were all things that they were really slow burning from the beginning. And so that kind of made me question, can these guys just do like a one-off episode where the characters are moving forward and it makes sense to the plot, but also the villain they're fighting matters as well? And so just in this show, we have some really poorly characterized Freak of the Weeks, and those being the First Weather Wizard, Multiplex, The Mist, Girder, Blackout, kind of Clock King, and I'll come back to that. Peekaboo.
Peekaboo, that sounds...
The Brie Larvin chick.
I know which one you're talking about.
The tech woman who Felicity calls her nemesis.
What? Queen Bee.
Yeah.
Oh God, I hated her.
The Everyman.
Not the worst Queen Bee in CW history, though.
Yeah, but
the one from Smallville was somehow worse.
Oh yeah, I'll agree there.
The bees becoming a human face is still the dumbest thing from the first season of Smallville.
That's like a long list of dumb things Smallville's done, to be fair.
So we have her as well. We also have Everyman. So that puts us at 9. And a lot of people include the second Weather Wizard in that too, which makes 10. And then and even though I think the second Weather Wizard is a lot better than the first one, because he's at least 2-dimensional, not 1-dimensional, I kind of threw Eiling on that list as well, because even though I love Clancy Brown, I love how intimidating he is, they write him off as such a one-dimensional, typical military guy of, this is the future, we've been suffering in these wars, do this for your country. It's like straight off of any typical comic book or TV show page of like the guy who's doing everything for the country, but they're doing really bad things. And so that makes 10, maybe 11 really poorly characterized villain of the weeks out of the 23 episodes that we had.
Well, let me ask you guys this. Do you think this season would have benefited even more if it was shorter?
I think the slow burn is what makes it work.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Like, it's not that the season was too long and that they used that time to develop other characters. It's that they just didn't do anything with like 10 or 11 of the villains that they had every week. It's like they struck a really nice balance with the ongoing mystery and with Wells and with Barry and with Joe and with Captain Cold. But I think they really suffered with like just overall managing their time episode to episode, because like the whole thing of the things you can't outrun, the third episode, great episode. I really like the character stuff that's going on here, but the background we give the Mist is sort of like an obligatory shoehorned in way to thematically tie the Freak of the Week to what the hero is going through. I think that episode is a really good example of it. But an episode that shows that issue even more is episode 2, where Multiplex is given his motivation 2 minutes before he dies. It's like the pacing was like completely off.
Oh wow! I know what my goal in life is. I'm dead.
Well, he literally it's the third act. It's the big fight scene where Flash is fighting all the clones, and he's like, "I'm trying to kill Stag because he stole my research, and I needed my research to save my wife." And then he falls off the building a minute and a half later. It's like, dude, why even just make him super menacing like they did with Captain Cold? Like, we didn't even get a full backstory for Captain Cold in the season, but he's still like the second best antagonist that they had all year. And now that's saying something, because Reverse Flash is so good and they're really close. But they introduced Captain Cold in episode 4, and we get some information about him, like how his dad is in prison. And I love how Barry has that line of, "Oh, his dad's in prison too? We should start a club." But like, they sometimes can write a really compelling villain while giving very little information about him. But other times with Multiplex and The Mist and Weather Wizard and all the other ones, like especially Peekaboo and Crazy for You, it's like it just feels completely off.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm more lenient when it comes to Freak of the Weeks as an X-Files fan. You kind of just get used to it.
Yeah.
And a Doctor Who fan, I'm used to the Monster of the Week.
Yeah.
But having read the first volume of Silver Age Flash, it is remarkable how similar their handling of Freak of the Weeks are to just how those first couple of issues will have like two villains in it, usually the same level of backstory. It's kind of similar, though. I think the sad thing is a lot of those villains had solid casting.
Yeah. Like
The Mist, who of course is Zaz on Gotham and is amazing.
Yeah, he's great. Like I love his performance. It's just they kind of don't do anything with him, and even when they bring him back, it's like he's kind of. But I'm glad you mentioned the Silver Age Flash, because I just got to reading some of that stuff finally, and you're right. Like they do sort of pull that, and in a way, it does make it more comic booky. We kind of talked about that earlier, but this is kind of a case where you need to have less reverence for the source material and try to make your story episode like. In each individual episode, a little bit tighter and a little bit more cohesive if the hero is going to be fighting some villain. I think that this sort of backdoor pilot that they did for Firestorm, the Nuclear Man and Fallout, the two-parter that they did, was actually a really ambitious episode, not because we're 12 episodes in and we're already doing a backdoor pilot for another character, but also because they didn't have some one-off Firestorm villain that they were trying to fight while saving Ronnie. The antagonist through those episodes is General Wade Eiling, and that's all right. And he's not really even that big of a villain either. He's more of our guy to get us to Firestorm, and more importantly, the guy to get us to Grodd. And so those episodes, it was really refreshing to not have that sort of issue that they had, especially early on, where the villain was kind of weak. But as far as the Silver Age stuff goes, I think one of the moments that I love the most that was straight out of the Silver Age comics was, the first Weather Wizard got downed, but when we bring back the real Weather Wizard, the first thing he does is throw a tsunamis at the city, and that is straight out of his first appearance. And that cover is just the Flash rotating his arm fast, which obviously wouldn't be enough. Even though we get that later, but I love that like they do stuff like that where Captain Cold shows up like he did in the comics, and then the rogues form. I like that Reverse Flash shows up, and then he gets a little bit more interesting, and all that stuff was great. And I liked Mark Martin better than his brother, and even though he wasn't as fleshed out as I would like him to be, he does have that sort of narcissistic god complex that he does in the comics. He does have that whole angle about avenging your family and keeping your family together, which might be kind of typical and might limit him to being two-dimensional, but that's what the Rogues are in the comics. Like, that's what the Rogues are. They are a family that find each other through their work because they came from broken homes. And so I like that Mark Martin, who is really like one of the mainstay Rogues, is starting off in this place of, you took my family away, now I'm going to like kill you for it. And then I really wish that he had sort of formed the Rogues, more concretely later on in the season. But I like that that's how we introduce him.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with pulling the Silver Age Tweet of the Week thing is those divided into, 2 villains per issue, so 13 pages each, roughly. That can maybe work for a 22-minute animated episode, like, the Batman animated series would, do a great job with that kind of stuff, or the Batman. But it's hard to do in a 45-minute episode, which you wouldn't think is the case because it's longer, but the problem is you either have to fully develop them or just let them be a set piece because you're dealing with so many, larger themes and whatnot for the season.
I think there could have been some two-parters for some of them.
I think it's just kind of a necessary evil in a lot of ways. You have to just deal with the occasional uninteresting villain or not super deep. The problem is when they're specifically poorly written, like Peekaboo. Like, I'm okay with someone like Everyman or even The Mist, because while they don't have much depth, they at least feel like they're a presence, and they're at least fun to see, not just as a set piece, but at least they are entertaining to watch, while some of them are just completely forgettable.
Well, and I'm going to disagree with you for a minute there, Red, when you said that they're a necessary evil. Because I'm willing to, this first season was great, but I'm willing to sort of call them out on that because they are able to deliver episodes that don't have that are fantastic without it. And so if these guys are able to deliver that high of a standard, I expect them to deliver something as close to that more frequently. Like, for example, the Girder episode, that episode kind of suffers because of Girder being really one-dimensional, but everything else going on that episode is fantastic. Like, Flash beats Girder through his intelligence because his intelligence, obviously with the help of his team, is his greatest asset. But, we do this really interesting thing with the episodes where Barry everybody learns a lesson about this sort of topic, this sort of random topic, and it's not random. I don't mean to say that it's random, but it's just like a topic about intelligence or something like that. Let's say, because this is the example I'm using, but Barry learns one lesson about that topic, and Wells will learn the reverse of it. So these episodes can be really tightly knit like that because in the Girder episode, Barry learns that his intelligence is his greatest asset, that he can't just go in blind and fight these people. But with Wells, he's almost too smart and too intelligent and too narcissistic for his own good because he doesn't anticipate Joe catching on to him like he does in that episode. And so for Barry, his greatest asset is his intelligence in that episode, but for Wells, it's almost his greatest weakness because when Joe comes in, he backpedals into this really like sort of creepy how good it is, like speech about Tess and how everything she meant to him. Like he recedes back into this emotional place because his intelligence can't save him with Joe because he doesn't anticipate him. So because they're able to turn in stuff like that, that makes me question why we're even bothering to have a villain when we can just be doing more interesting character stuff, or we need to hold off on doing stuff with Barry and Wells for an episode so we can have a more interesting episode-to-episode villain like Captain Cold.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. Like, Girder isn't an interesting character in himself, but he brings out those themes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more forgivable in those kind of cases, while some of them, like Peekaboo being the big one, don't really work that way. Like, it's there, but it's so tangentially connected.
Yeah.
The idea of a villain named Peekaboo just still sounds hilarious.
Well, and she's cool in the comics, like,
yeah.
I don't really know why they fucked her up so much. Like, excuse my French, but they totally did because Jeff Johns is so involved in the show. Like, in her debut issue, she steals a kidney for her dad who's dying, and she's completely sympathetic. And like, she ends up going to jail, and because Wally's the Flash is like, "What can I do?" And then the DA he's talking to is like, well, what are we supposed to do? Move her dad up on the list, but move other people down? Like, we can't do anything in this situation. And so it's this really, like, sad end of the issue where Wally is just, like, sort of so depressed about how fucked up some of the systems in the world can be and about how powerless he is. But then we make her this typical loving the bad boy who doesn't love her back and only wants her for the sex and her powers and for money. And that episode, Crazy for You, just feels so much like filler because Barry's whole arc of we need to move on and Caitlin's arc of we need to move on, they both have the same arc. Barry meets Linda Park in that episode and goes out with her, which is fine. But then Caitlin immediately gets back together with Ronnie the next episode. So that arc really only matters for one character. You know, it's like sometimes with that Freak of the Week stuff, when we do occasionally have a hiccup with a member of the main cast, like at the end of Power Outage or in Crazy for You, some of those problems show, the seams in the writing show a little bit more.
Should we talk about the plot cul-de-sac that is Linda?
yeah, definitely.
So this series, or this universe, has 3 Linda Parks.
Yep.
I just think we should mention that.
Or
Oh,
4,
yeah, I
really,
forgot about
right?
this.
Wait, 4?
Because there's the Earth 2 version.
Okay, yeah, but 3 actresses,
On
all
Earth
of
1.
which are like 10 years apart in age. It's the weirdest thing.
The
I
Linda
know.
League.
Yeah, but this time around, I when I was watching through the season, I definitely picked up on that because Barry goes out with her and then they go out again and she immediately tries to sleep with him and they play it off as this like kind of like a Superman thing of, oh, you need to be careful because what are you going to do to some girl who's not a metahuman, which I thought was kind of weird at first because he's just fast. Like, he's not going to do anything, but
It's not Man of Steel, Women of Tissue.
Right. Right. But then they go out on this date and then they go out bowling in the Out of Time episode, right? Or hold on a second. They go out in the episode where Barry goes back to time. I just want to make sure I'm getting the names of the episode right. Yeah, it is Out of Time. So they go out bowling, and then the next day is the day that Barry travels through time at the end of the day. But the big bowling thing from the night before is this huge issue because, Barry's there and Linda's there and Iris and Eddie are there, and it's so clear that Barry and Iris just have so much chemistry, and Linda and Eddie are just like, what the fuck? Like, why am I even dating this person? Like, the looks on their faces, the way they're reading it. And that's actually a really great Barry and Iris moment where it shows their chemistry and how well they know each other, where they're showing us and not telling us. And so, like, that becomes the big issue because, Linda, totally calls out Iris and says, when you said that, Barry had feelings for you, you didn't tell me that you had feelings for him as well. And I was like, damn, Linda Park is a boss for calling her out. And then Eddie's upset. And then by the end of the episode, when Barry travels back in time, he travels back to that morning after, and then nobody talks about it. And then Barry breaks up with Linda because he knows Iris has feelings for her, and he's trying to go out with Linda and say that he doesn't have feelings for Iris, but then immediately tells Iris, when she admits to have feelings for him, that he's been thinking about her nonstop. It's like, what the fuck?
This is why I like staying single, folks. I don't have to put up with this kind of stuff.
Well, and it doesn't have to be like this. Like, this isn't how real people act. Like,
Well, because real people don't travel back in time.
well, but more
As far as
importantly,
you
yeah.
know.
in the Rogue Time episode, after Barry travels back, there is no reason why they all shouldn't be talking about the bowling thing. The only reason why they're not is because the big thing is Barry just traveled back in time, so nobody's talking about it. They're acting like he traveled back to the morning before the bowling, but he didn't. Like, the bowling thing was the big thing that set off everything happening in that episode, and we just kind of forget about it, even though it still happened. And so that's, I don't necessarily like Linda Park moving so fast, although Flash puns. But
should she have been in this season in the first place?
What's that?
Should she have even been in this season in the first place?
I mean, given what we do with her, that Barry goes out with her, and then we throw her under the bus because of time travel, I don't know. I really like her. I like the chemistry they have. They are instantly likable. Every scene they're together is absolutely fantastic. I love the way they're written, the way they act, the way the actors acted out too. Excuse me. I love how confident and straightforward Linda is. And that, because of where we were with the relationship stuff when these episodes pick up, was a breath of fresh air, because people just were not being honest with each other for arbitrary reasons. But I don't know. I mean, part of me says no because I want her to be with Wally West, and Wally is like she if she's old enough to go out with Barry, she should not go out with Wally at all if they ever bring her back.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah.
Because Wally, we know, is a couple years younger than Barry, which that just doesn't even make sense anyway.
Maybe he'll end up with the Linda Park from season 1 of Arrow, the 50-year-old woman.
That would still be a pretty big age gap.
That Gravity Falls on my icon. Do I look like someone who cares about age gaps when it comes to romance? Only Gravity Falls fans will get that.
But that's an interesting question, Red. I never thought about it. I just noticed that Barry completely throws her under the bus as soon as Iris, looks in his direction and says, "Hey, I like you." And I kind of like Barry a lot less for that, especially because, again, in episode 12, his arc was, I'm going to move on. But then as soon as Iris swoons for him, he goes to catch her as fast as he can. But I will say, just because the out-of-time stuff I think is really interesting to talk about, how did you guys feel about them revealing a bunch of stuff to the audience and kind of rolling it back?
I think it's done really well. That's where we get the Thawne kill Cisco thing, right?
Oh yeah, I remember when I first saw that. That made my jaw drop because
that's fucked up.
Yeah, like I thought it was like, oh, it's a normal episode, but then he revealed Cisco figures it out. They meet each other, then he just immediately kills Cisco. I was like, what?
Yeah, that was crazy. The reason why I asked is because this show kind of got some flack for everybody on the internet saying, "Oh my God, the status quo is going to be so different." But then the next episode, it wasn't, because Cisco was still alive. Nobody knew about the Thawne thing. But to be fair, I think what made it so well done is that what happened at the end of Out of Time was everybody basically became suspicious of Wells. Cisco died, and Iris confessed her feelings to Barry. And then in the new timeline, the Rogue Time episode, people end up being suspicious of Wells because he kills Mason Bridge. Cisco doesn't die, but we do move forward with the relationship stuff because Barry basically confessed again to Iris, and then we're trying to move forward with him trying to make up with that. So we do kind of keep the status quo similar, but it's different enough to where we can keep moving and still have the cast in the same way. But what I was going to mention earlier about the whole should the season have been shorter thing, when The Flash was picked up, it was only picked up for like 13 episodes. They weren't picked up for a full season. And so when they planned the ending of the end of these 13 episodes, the 13th episode was going to be Out of Time. But because the ratings blew up, they were able to push that stuff back a little bit and do the two-parter with Firestorm first, and then do the time travel stuff. So the last episode, in case they got canceled, was going to be Cisco dies, Barry and Iris confess their feelings to one another. We know who Wells is at last, and Barry traveled back in time. So in case they got canceled, people would be so upset that they wanted them to bring the show back, which I think was really smart on their part, being as building everything. But at the same time, it's like, did Wells really need to leave his wheelchair there? Like, there were just some minor inconsistencies where it's like, oh, because this is the episode where we plan that, every single major thing is going to happen, so we can roll it back kind of and then slowly get there.
That's amazing that even though you did say there's some hiccups, and I'm sure there are, it's still the season overall worked out. Like, because stuff like that happens to TV, and you can just see ooh, you guys are not handling this transition well at all.
Cough, Arrow season 2, cough.
That other shows
Yeah.
I know. Once Upon a Time had that problem in spades. I still love that show to death. But like that's some quality right there. When that happens, because TV can be a harsh mistress. To be dramatic for a second. But yeah, continue, Jake. Sorry, I just wanted to bring that up.
No, that was really the point I wanted to make about the out of time thing. I figured it was worth it to talk about it because that was like the big thing. Like, I remember watching that episode the first time, and when Thawne said his name, I literally paused the episode and was like, holy shit, this is amazing. And then I had to unpause it, and then I paused it when Cisco died, and I was like, I don't know how to feel about myself anymore. Like, because that is another scene that perfectly encapsulates Thawne as well, where he has such love and reverence and respect for these people, but that doesn't change what he has to do, at least from his perspective. And then we get that really cool scene in Rogue Time where he takes him down there and gives him a similar speech, but without revealing his information, any information that he needs to. And I really like that because he has this relationship with Cisco, when he knows that Cisco is found out and out of time, he introduces himself fully as Eobard Thawne and reveals his name because he thinks of this guy like his son. He's not going to leave that out. He at least wants him to know his name before he ends up crushing his heart with his vibrating hand.
Hi. So I guess I got one more question for you guys. If you got more to say, we can skip this one and move to make this the last one because this is a very finite kind of question. But how do you think this season holds up, looking at the rest of the show and how it kind of tanked? Well, at least that's what I've heard. Like, is it still very solid first season? Like, you can go back easily?
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is the best of Flash. Like, earlier when you were saying about like how the time travel could have been bad, all you need to do is watch the next 23 episodes of the show and see how time travel can be bad in the TV show. Like, whatever formula they have for the show worked so well in this season, and it has really not worked since.
They got lightning in a bottle of science juice.
Yeah, they got a little bit of it in season 2, but then it just downhill.
And I don't
series 5.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be like so harsh or negative to them and come off as being so harsh or negative, because we've been talking a lot of negative stuff, but I mean, this show did kind of trail off. I mean, it in a way, like every season and kind of every episode, at least thematically, is really, really good and works well. Like, people have given season 4 a lot of flack, but I really like the fact that now that Barry and Iris were married in that season, we're pairing them up with another married couple. I think that's kind of cool, and we did a lot of work with Barry and Iris versus Clifford and Marlize DeVoe. I thought that was really interesting, but I think this was the most straightforward season. This is the season where, because they were put in a situation where they knew that this might not work out, they really put their hearts into this and really tried to get it right, and that shows. And I think because the way that TV works, where you don't really know where your ending is going to be, but they did kind of know that they only had 11 episodes or 13 to begin with. That forced them to plan out a beginning, middle, and end of their story. And even though there is some arbitrary stuff that goes on here, this season is the best of the Flash so far because of that.
I guess it just shows to the quality or sometimes non-quality of the writers to an extent, especially when they keep getting renewed. Like, like some people can just handle it. They can just like, okay, we're getting a new season, let's go. And others are like, oh shoot, we're getting a new season. I don't know what to do anymore. I saw that with Once Upon a Time. With that's how that show worked. It's sort of like we didn't know we were getting a new season until like the very end, and so we kind of had to write like, okay, we gotta set up the next season now. Neverland arc is Frozen now.
Well, and this show, even in seasons 2, 3, and 4, never suffers from poor ideas. Really, the only exception to that would be Flashpoint. But even then, like they do something really interesting with Flashpoint, which is Barry causing Flashpoint is something I will never sympathize with and will never support because it's a very dumb, selfish thing that he should never do if he's supposed to be a hero. Like, we don't need to take him that low in order to get there, but the reason why he goes back on the show is because he lost his dad, and then he goes back because he lost both parents, which I think is nice that we took him to that low place. And then thematically in season 3, the natural conclusion to Barry causing Flashpoint is an evil version of the Flash that is also that is not Eobard Thawne, Barry Allen. I like that we take it that far and that thematically that works, and that there are more consequences to Flashpoint than there's a time boom and now there's a war. It's like that always felt kind of because it was more of a DC Universe story. But by and large, the ideas in the show have always been good. But in season 1, that was where they were the most tightly knit, where everything was really tight and everything was, for the most part, really well written.
Right, and I'm glad that this first season still holds up overall. It's like I've seen people. I've talked to people when it comes to shows or games or just series where like later stuff kind of ruins the experience. So I'm glad it's still nice and tight.
Well, I mean, I do have to say, knowing that Barry goes back at the end of season 2 and causes Flashpoint makes what happens in the season 1 finale really, really dumb.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because we ignore the entire season, the ethical implications of going back in time and what that would do to people, and why Flashpoint needs to be a story about the ethics of time travel, not because you cause an arbitrary war, but because if Barry Allen is a guy who cares so much about people and cares so much about inspiring people, and his role as a CSI is so important because he wants everybody to live a life and live a full life, even though he understands that life is not permanent. And so, we need to make the best of what we can, and he channeled that loss into something positive and uplifting in his career and as the Flash. Then that means the lesson of Flashpoint needs to be that I can't travel through time because I'm basically going to be killing everyone and erasing all of their lives just for it to be rewritten with something that could be just as bad or as good, if not worse.
And I'm actually sorry, no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just about to say, I should have asked this when we actually talked about the time travel, but like during season 1, what kind of rules does the time travel actually operate on? I'm asking as a Doctor Who fan, Back to the Future. Is it cause and effect? Is it like the always meant to happen? Is it the I'm your grandfather secretly kind of thing?
Well, it's kind of vague because when Reverse Flash shows up, he talks about how we've been doing this for centuries, and he says, it was it's your destiny to lose to me, Flash. It's just as it was your mother's destiny to die that night. And at first I kind of resisted the whole destiny talk because in real life, it's a bunch of bull crap. But from his perspective, as the mass manipulator, it is kind of destiny because Thawne is doing what Barry won't do, which is travel through time so much so to the point that he can control what events happen after he travels through time initially. Like, that's why Thawne becomes a living paradox, because he only, like, the only person he really cares about is himself and his legacy and leaving his mark on history and becoming a living paradox and becoming immortal. And so from him, that makes sense. But the time travel overall is kind of vague in the sense that we don't really get the whole Speed Force explanation until later on. But the way it's initially explained by Martin Stein is that, everything that's happening, is just a moment in time, and that there must be a thing that connects all the moments in times, like a highway, and we just need to find an on-ramp. A ramp onto that and a ramp off in order to travel through time. And what they kind of hint at is the Speed Force is that highway, that it connects all of time and space, and speedsters are the on and off ramps because they can go in and out of it. But when Barry travels through time and out of time, wow, that was, I should not have said it like that. When Barry travels through time for the first, I guess I shouldn't say it like that either. Fuck me. When he travels through time after the tsunami, it's explained that it's sort of like a mixture of how fast you're going versus the adrenaline versus all this other biological stuff. And so he does it independently of anything. But then at the end of the season, he has to collide with a particle in order to create a wormhole to travel through time. And it's like, if you're able to travel through time independently, if you move fast enough and if you're focused enough, then you don't need the particle accelerator. But
he needed to open it for the time pod.
Wormhole, for the wormhole, yeah. Right? So I think that the reason why they did that is because Thawne was manipulating him and saying, hey, I need you to give me what I want, but by doing so, you'll get what you want. So because Thawne can't open a wormhole for himself, Barry has to collide with the particle to keep the wormhole open long enough for Thawne to travel back to the future. That's why I just wish they'd gotten that across a little bit better, that speedsters can travel independently. But because the purpose of traveling through time in Fast Enough, the finale, is so both people can travel through time, that they just had to do it that way.
Also, Spielberg is going to sue us.
Also, minor nitpick, if the Speed Force is the thing you go into when you break the space-time barrier, why does Barry see it before he collides with the particle? Right? Like, and every other time Barry travels through time, he leaves reality, he breaks the space-time barrier, and then we start seeing the memories, and then he goes back in time. Now, for us, we know it's because Thawne has to walk him through it, and because they want to tease stuff like Killer Frost, Trial of the Flash Museum, which was all great. I thought all that was amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Flash Museum thing, like, all season long, I was anticipating them having Flash and Reverse Flash, or Flash and the Rogues, having a big fight there and having it be destroyed and then rebuilt as the Flash Museum, because it looks like the Flash Museum. They got the gold Truth, Justice, Liberty thing. The statue outside of the gold George Washington is the same material and pose that the future Flash Museum statue is in. I'm like, why have they not done this yet 4 seasons in? But I think they might be doing this now in season 5. But that was the only, like, minor nitpick that I had with the time travel, is like Barry seeing the Speed Force now, like, that doesn't make any sense.
Season 5, a time war, and Barry will be the last of the speedsters because he destroyed them all. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
So was that your other question, Joel, that you had?
Yeah, I just wanted to know about how the time travel, because like I like these sorts of things, especially for shows like this. Like you gotta hammer your time travel, because lesser writers, this could all go south very quickly.
So before we close, if anybody else has anything to add, feel free. But I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about Iris because she's obviously a really integral, part of the show, and I think that they kind of had some missed opportunities with her that would have made the season more cohesive as a whole. Because with the journalism thing, like she starts out going to school for psychology or whatever. She literally comes out and says she thinks journalism is boring and that she'll make something up when Simon Stagg, doesn't give her a thing. But then all of a sudden, when the Flash shows up, she's like, "Ooh, this is interesting. I want to investigate the Flash." And I think they ran the risk too much of the love interest being interested in being a journalist and because the hero, her, like the guy that likes her is now the hero and she doesn't know about it, but she's interested in the hero, so that's why she's going to report on him. And I think later on in like episodes 4 and 5, when we get the revelation that Iris is doing this because of Barry, I really like that, at least initially, and then it becomes more about the helping people thing and inspiring people just like Barry does. But I think what they were trying to do and what the point that they were trying to get across was that Barry was struck by lightning and he felt like he could finally Barry felt like he could finally start living the moment he got struck by lightning, that he could finally move forward and have a life. And I think they were trying to do the same thing with Iris, is that thematically she's able to move forward and she's able to find her passion in life and find what she loves doing in life through that lightning and through Barry. And that's what would draw them together. But then they didn't do that. And I was kind of disappointed because that would have been a really mature, realistic way of going about bringing them together instead of, Barry, you lied to me about the two most important things in your life. And then Barry says, yeah, well, you weren't exactly truthful to me either because I think you have feelings for me too. And then Barry gets called back into the cortex and then end scene. And then she's back with Eddie at the end of the season. And then he dies. It's like, it was a total missed opportunity because we really could have hammered home that idea of this extraordinary thing is what allowed these people to both move forward in their lives and find what they love doing, but find what they love doing together.
Romance. Yeah.
What do you guys think? Am I totally off on that, or?
No, it makes sense.
It sounds like they went the lie revealed plot, which is cliche and tiresome.
Well, and part of the thing is I really love some of the moments that Barry has with Iris. Like the mid-season finale, I think, is probably my favorite episode of the season. I love how calmly romantic the opening is, where Barry has made a replica of her mom's wedding band and gives that to her. It was a really touching moment, and then Eddie comes in and like, we don't know what he got her for Christmas, what they're doing for Christmas, and like we don't know what's going on about that. And I love the scene where Barry tells her that he has feelings for her, and I like that she's just kind of like crying and doesn't say anything because she's in shock. But at the same time, like Barry's reason is I couldn't lie to you anymore. But in episode 5, he says, I can't see you anymore because I'm lying to you so much. It's like, no, like if you're saying that you have to tell her now because you can't live without her, why did you tell her 4 episodes prior that you shouldn't see each other for a while, you know?
No, I agree. I don't think there's a problem.
I agree with you. As for personally, I know it's off track, but my favorite episode has got to be Tricksters.
Yeah, that's up there. That's probably top 3 or 5 for me. Yeah,
Got Mark Hamill.
Yeah, Mark Hamill is just a load of fun. I really dig all the stuff they try to do with the characters. I like the villains. My favorite moment has got to be when Mark Hamill does the reverse Empire Strikes Back bit.
Yeah, and that was probably the most comic booky episode where they were really reverential to the material, and it showed because sometimes with stuff like this, they do the comic booky thing, but then play it off as really silly. And I love that they were confident and ambitious enough to just go for it. Because they got Mark Hamill, and I'm glad that they got him because he's great as the role. He's a great actor, and I wish he would get more stuff to do. And I like that we brought him back a couple times, and that we will bring him back in the future. My only issue with that episode is that Axel Walker is kind of one-dimensional. When in the comics, he was created by Jeff Johns and Scott Collins, and he's a really cool character. He's like the first, well, not the first, but like the first in a while major like legacy character in the Rogues, because the Rogues sort of take him under his wing, and he's like, oh wow, this is so cool, like I want to be a rogue, and it's this really big thing, and it's fantastic. But in this episode, he's kind of just like a punk kid, and maybe that's just because they wanted Mark Hamill to steal the show, and he totally did. But Tricksters is definitely up there too, and I love that the episode that we get a lot of answers about what happened the night that Barry's mom died and who the Reverse Flash really is. I love that we find out that stuff in an episode that's called The Tricksters and has the Tricksters in it, because everybody has been tricked for the whole season.
Yep. Anyone else have anything to say before we wrap up?
We still need to talk about Team Flash.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Team
yeah.
Flash.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about that. Red, since you brought him up, do you have anything to say about him? Did you like him?
So I'm with Duke on the hashtag damn it Cisco side of things for the most part.
I liked Cisco. He was probably my favorite for the first season. Season 2, he just kind of warmed at his welcome, but...
Really? I thought his humor was kind of typical, and like when he's not cracking jokes, he's talking about how hot women are, and I find that kind of annoying and problematic.
Especially when like half of that is coming when he's watching people while they don't know on cameras.
Exactly, and like one of the first things he says is like when Wells tells Barry in the pilot that Iris, came to see him a lot, Caitlin was like, she talks a lot, and he's like, yeah, and also she's hot. It's like, dude, come on. But then we kill him by having Wells kill him, and that character just totally comes alive.
Mm-hmm.
Comes alive by dying.
And I think Caitlin, when I watched through the season, I really enjoyed how much time they were spending trying to develop Caitlin in episodes 2 and 3. I think in the first episode, in the pilot, like Barry has that scene after the commercial break where he's in Star Labs. He's got all the files of the weird cases from the past 9 months. And he's like, oh, I need your guys' help. And it's like, why do you need their help? What do you think they can do? Like, you don't really even know what they can do yet. And then they just agree to help. And that felt kind of off. And I think Caitlin was by far the weakest of the three, of Barry, Cisco, and Caitlin. And part of that is because she doesn't really have a relationship with Wells outside of Wells telling her we're going to bring Ronnie home, and then him going back on it and her telling him to bring him home. Like, and she never confronts him in the pipeline in the finale when Barry and Cisco do, and there's a deleted scene of Joe confronting Wells when he's in the pipeline, but Caitlin never does because it's always about Ronnie. That, I don't know, I just wish that she'd gotten more to do with him, and that if Cisco was like a son to him, Caitlin should be like a daughter. And I wish we had developed that just as much as we developed Cisco.
Yeah, that was kind of my problem. It took me a while to actually like Caitlin, because at first I found her a little kind of, well, not really maybe bland. I don't know, but it just kind of took me a while that they were a little bit struggling to figure out what her place, what her character should be, or how to handle it.
Yeah.
And I think they still are, because every fucking season it's the same. She falls in love with someone who turns out to be the villain, or dies, or something.
Or I'm Killer Frost. No, I'm not. On and off again.
Yeah, and I think I can say, speaking to the Flash generally, like, this season was the best, partially because it was so tight knit, but as time went on, it felt like there was more and more padding, and it became more and more difficult for them to write characters consistently, scene to scene, episode to episode, season to season. Like in season 3, Killer Frost works with Savitar, the guy who killed HR, killed a lot of other people, and is completely evil. But then in the middle of the season, when Caitlin can't turn into Killer Frost, Iris, who's somehow, for whatever reason, leading Team Flash because we need to make her important when she's not doing journalism stuff, is like, no, we need to get Killer Frost back because we all love her and miss her. It's like, did you guys forget what happened 6 months ago? Like, come on. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I really enjoyed the season overall. I think even though I spent a lot of time sort of talking about the negatives of the show, when I'm watching it, and even when I'm talking about it afterwards, the good stuff that's there, which is about like 85 to 90% of the time, is so good and so strong that it carries me through that whatever issue that they're having. And the issues there really aren't as major as anything that they have going on in any other CW shows.
Mm-hmm.
Is Flash, like, out of the CW shows right now, like, the least problematic, even though it's still probably as problematic? Sorry.
Yeah, probably.
Is Supergirl still good?
I dropped off of that halfway through season 2. It was Supergirl.
I still watch Legends because that's the most fun for me. Where I'm like, oh, this may not be perfect, but I'm like, I enjoy this.
I know what they did to the JSA, and I emotionally can't handle that.
Well, I enjoyed season 2, but I'll agree. Fuck what they did with the JSA.
Well, and now was supposed to be called Justice Society. Like that original team was going to be the Justice Society, and then they didn't do that.
I'm so scared about the Stargirl show. Like, part of me is like, oh, one of my favorite characters in all of comics is getting a show.
Is it in the same universe?
We don't know, but it is headed, I believe, by Berlanti. The thing is, Jeff Johns is going to be like the head writer.
Oh,
it seems
okay.
like he's, and that's his character. Like, he
Yeah.
has a closer relation to that character than he does to any other character.
Yeah, it was inspired by his sister, correct?
Yeah, his late sister. And so, he, for obvious reasons, is very protective. And so...
Is he like Dave Filoni to Ahsoka protective of that character?
Well, again, it's based on his sister who passed away.
Okay, so yeah, I can see why.
He really loves that character, and that's the thing that makes me hopeful about that.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to the
that's
streaming
pretty
service, but...
I don't know. Apparently there's a fucking Booster Gold show that's coming out as well.
What?
What?
There might, like, I was just checking Kreisberg on IMDb while we were talking, and he's listed for that. There's nothing else. But then again, IMDb is something. But I had to write an article on Cyborg being cast for the Doom Patrol show.
I read that. That was good.
My first reaction, though, was, wait, there's a Doom Patrol show?
Yeah, I didn't know this for about a year. I even read they wanted to do an episode on Titans, I think.
Yeah, Elastigirl's gonna actually be in the show. I had no idea. Titans, I mean. I was not informed of this.
Well, I think because Jeff Johns is going to be involved in Stargirl, it's probably going to be pretty good. Just like this season was, because Jeff Johns kind of backpedaled a little bit because he had more responsibilities in DC after this. Because even when the show was coming out, he was writing like 5 books at a time, which is fucking crazy. That dude is just a workaholic.
Do you think
Um,
that Jeff John is the reason why this particular season was better compared to the other seasons?
Probably.
Yeah.
Because he has so much reverence for Barry and Iris and Thawne and Captain Cold. Like, something I didn't mention is like an Easter egg is Cold kept saying in his initial episode is like, we have 182 seconds until the cops get here. 182 seconds, 182 seconds. When Flash Volume 2, Issue 182 is the big rogue profile Jeff Johns did on Captain Cold that sort of not like reinvented the character, but fleshed out all of his origins and his motivations, and is just one of the best, if not the best, single issues of his run on the Flash.
Oh, earlier you said you had something to say about clocking.
Oh yeah, okay. So I listed him in the villains who were sort of poorly characterized, and I put Clock King on that list not because he was poorly characterized, because I love the actor, I love how they wrote him, but rather because it was a missed opportunity that the fastest man alive, the guy who has all the time in the world, was not on screen with the guy who has to, as more methodically than Harrison Wells, Eobard Thawne, plan out every single second of his life. That was a missed opportunity. I would have loved them to have Flash fight him, to have Clock King work with the Rogues, or have like a smaller Arrow. Like, if we were going to have Arrow show up later in the show like he did, I mean, I really love the fight that Arrow, Firestorm, and Flash have against Reverse Flash. I would have been cool with having Clock King, Arrow, and Flash fight, like Arrow and Flash fight Clock King together.
Yeah.
Because he has his thing against Arrow, but then it's kind of this other thing against Flash because he's the fastest man alive, and I would have loved to see that happen. And has he been on Arrow or anything
I don't
since
think
then?
so, which sucks because he's one of the best villains in the entire CWU.
Yeah, like, that was just one of the biggest missed opportunities. He wasn't even on screen with the Flash. Like, come on. So, anyway.
Yep. Well, I think if we don't have anything else to say, I'll wrap us up. Everyone good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. That was our season 1 discussion of Flash. I hope to do more of these TV show things as time goes on with different people and whatnot. Thank you all for joining us, and until next time, later.